God's sight. And he was brought up for 3 months in his father's house. And when he was exposed, Pharaoh's daughter adopted him and brought him up as her own son. And Moses was instructed in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, mighty in his words and deeds. When he was 40 years old, it came into his heart to visit his brothers, the children of Israel. And seeing one of them being wronged, he defended the oppressed man and avenged him by striking down the Egyptian. He supposed that his brothers would understand that God was giving them salvation by his hand, but they did not understand. And on the following day, he appeared to them as they were quarreling and tried to reconcile them, saying, "Men, you are brothers. Why do you wrong each other?" But the man who was wronging his neighbor thrust him aside, saying, "Who made you a ruler and judge over us? Do you want to kill me as you killed the Egyptian yesterday?" At this retort, Moses fled and became an exile in the land of Midian, where he became the father of 2 sons. Now, when 40 years had passed, an angel appeared to him in the wilderness of Mount Sinai in a flame of fire in a bush. When Moses saw it, he was amazed at the sight, and as he drew near to look, there came the voice of the Lord. "I am the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham and of Isaac and of Jacob." And Moses trembled and did not dare to look. And then the Lord said to him, "Take off the sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and I have heard their groaning, and I have come down to deliver them. And now come, I will send you to Egypt." This Moses, who they rejected, saying, "Who made you a ruler and judge?" This man God sent as both ruler and redeemer by the hand of the angel who appeared to him in the bush. This man led them out, performing wonders and signs in Egypt and at the Red Sea and in the wilderness for 40 years. This is the Moses who said to the Israelites, "God will raise up for you a prophet like me from your brothers." This is the one who was in the congregation in the wilderness with the angel who spoke to him at Mount Sinai with our fathers. He received living oracles to give to us. This is the word of the Lord. And so the answer to the question, what is God's good desire in giving us directions or laws for life? This full answer, if you feel comfortable, we can now read together. It is that we would be released from serving other things and would find freedom in God. God pursues us to free us from the oppression, brokenness, shame, and division of this fallen world, and from slavery to the things of this world. As God, through Moses, delivered the Israelites out of Egypt, he desires to free us also. He calls us into his promised kingdom to give us rest. Amen. All right, and with that, we start our new series on the freedom that God brings. We have been set free to live free. God gives us his law. We're first finding out this morning, where we're looking at it this morning, the goal of the law is to bring us freedom. He has not brought us into slavery, but he has freed us from slavery. He has given us a better, more life-giving, more whole, inspiring law to guide us not into servitude, but into freedom from the other things that would grasp onto us and make us serve them. There are so many things in this life that bring us down, and yet we need to know how to build our lives back up. Where do we go? Where do we turn to? Which way is better? These are the questions that are answered throughout the books of Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy. In this series on the law of God, we are going to look at the purpose of the law and the shape of the law and the weight of the law and the fulfillment of the law. We've already been through the whole book of Genesis throughout the fall leading up to the winter. And now we're going to take these 4 weeks to go through Exodus and Leviticus today. We're going to go through the 10 Commandments next week. We're going to go through Numbers the week after that and finish up with Deuteronomy to finish off of our weeks. And these books also introduce us to Moses. He is a leader and a prophet and a lawgiver. And his story shows us the great challenge that he had to bring this news of who God is and the law that he brings to a people that, knowingly or not, whether they knew it or not, were in servitude to so many other things, so bound up that they could not escape those things. and they kept running back to where they had come from. And God wanted to lead them into a promised land. Now, in this series, we're going to do something with the exception of next week, because I didn't want to force this on someone else. I figured I'll go and do this to myself. We're going to do a little bit more interactive. And so I'm going to preach a couple of points, and then I'm going to stop. And we're going to do a little question and answer, or question and response, because I might not have an answer, but there will be a response. And we'll kind of see this as a way of us all participating in looking at the law that God gives and how we can interact with it, how we can build this recognition of God's goodness in being our lawgiver into our lives. Now, we've just passed New Year's, and we have come through and started a new year. And part of the new year is that many of us make New Year's resolutions. There we go. Okay, we're on it this morning. We make New Year's resolutions. And what this is we say, we have been serving something else this past year. We've been caught up in some other kind of pattern. We've been doing some other kind of thing. This year, no more. We're going to make a law that we're going to do something else. And as part of these New Year's resolutions, we bring accountability structures. We announce what we have decided. We take these resolutions, and if we do what we want to do, we take these restrictions and we place them on ourselves to say, this will guide us during the year of 2026. I will do this. I will not do this. I will aim towards this. I will finally get this written or done or built or demolished, depending on which state your home is in and whether you want to bring something down or put something up. Cadence's resolution this year is that she wants to learn drums. Pray for me. But she's been practicing. We've been doing a lot of driving in the last week or two, and she takes out whatever she's got, some chopsticks or some sticks or whatever. She's finding drumsticks. She's making drumsticks out of things, and she'll take the little bit of extension cord at the bottom and an ice cube tray and something else, and she's actually really good. Like, for a 10-year-old, she's got mix-ups. She knows when to come in, and she's getting better and better. She's, Dad, put on the radio. I want to practice drumming. I'm like, okay. Anyway, I knew that she had it when we got to the end of a trip, and she said, "Oh, my hands, they hurt so much, and but I just want to keep going." And she said, "Dad, I'm sorry, but the ice cube tray is destroyed, and this has dents in it, and this extension cord thing is all flaked up." And I said, "I'm so proud of you." So her resolution is that she's going to put some time into this and learn how to drum. And I love that she has this. One of my resolutions, I'm going to do a little bit more disciplines and a little bit more writing. There's some things that I want to do. Kendra has a business that she got up and going, and then Annika was born, and so that went on the back burner, and so she's gonna get that up and going as well. We all have resolutions, things that we have said, I will do this. And as part of our resolutions, as part of many of our resolutions, whatever they might be, we may build in accountability to say, I'm accountable to do this. Someone is going to call me out on it. We may build in systems, which are structures that will kind of hopefully guide us in towards doing these things that we have decided. We might announce our resolutions to someone. Now, ordinarily, you might not say, I want to accomplish this by the end of the year, because if you don't, you kind of look a little bit foolish. And yet announcing that gives you accountability. It forces you to say, I really will get this done, because I don't want at the end of the year anyone to say, hey, I thought you were gonna. And so it forces you in. We may come up with penalties. We may decide that every day that goes by without writing, or every day that goes by where we get a little hot under the collar, or every day that goes by where we miss our reading plan, or every day that goes by where we don't do this or that, we might put something in the jar. I know one person who they set it up where every day their account is automatically geared to give to a political campaign for someone that they despise. And every day if they have done everything that they set out for their disciplines, they deactivate the payment for that day. And when they haven't quite gotten to it, they face midnight and they watch, knowing that something is coming out of their account to go to this thing that they hate. Maybe that could be recommended for you. But even, or maybe don't do that. Do it if you're very disciplined. Another way that we might take rules, laws, guidelines, and place them over ourselves, not for our harm, but for our freedom, is in something called Alcoholics Anonymous's 12-step program. I know inwardly there's different objections to that and whatnot, but hear me out. The 12 steps are these. Number 1, admit powerlessness. I can't do it on my own. Number 2, believe in a greater power than ourselves. Well, I like that a whole lot. Number 3, decide to turn our will and our lives over to God, something greater than ourselves. We don't decide our own fate. We listen to him. Number 4, make a fearless moral inventory of ourselves, because no progress comes without self-examination. Number 5, admit to God and to ourselves and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs, because no progress comes without admitting guilt. Number 6, become entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of characters. Number 7, humbly ask God to remove our shortcomings. Number 8, make a list of all the persons harmed and become willing to make amends, because there is no progress without resolving to make it right. And number 9, make direct amends wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. Number 10, continue to take personal inventory and promptly admit wrong. Number 11, seek through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God, praying only for knowledge of his will and the power to carry it out. And number 12, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, try to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all of our affairs. Now, this doesn't actually name which higher power or which God is to be trusted in. And so for something that is this general to be effective, imagine how much more effective it is to know which God that you're praying to and which God you're submitting to and whose instructions are being given for life. Imagine knowing that this is Jesus. This is Jesus, who both gives us a good and perfect law, a way of living, but also gives us the grace to come out when we know that we have failed. He is not standing there holding it over us and judging us, but he is inviting us to come back to himself, and he is strong in our place. He invites us into his victory. A March 11th, 2020 article in Stanford Medicine titled Alcoholics Anonymous, Most Effective Path to Alcohol Abstinence notes this: the work of 145 scientists and the outcomes of 10,080 participants found AA was nearly always found to be more effective than psychotherapy in achieving abstinence. It goes on to say, although AA is well known and used by millions around the world, mental health professionals are sometimes skeptical of its effectiveness. Psychologists and psychiatrists trained to provide cognitive behavioral therapy and motivational enhancement therapy to treat patients with alcohol use disorder can have a hard time admitting that the lay people who run AA groups do a better job of keeping people on the wagon. Imagine that. Knowing that we have limits and we can't do it on our own, and submitting ourselves to God actually makes a difference. It makes a bigger difference than anything else out there. It is what did the article say? It is the most effective path to abstinence. And so knowing that there's something that we want to be freed of, and knowing that the only way to do so is to submit not to our own inward preferences, our own inward desires. That's what's got us where we are, but to submit to someone else, something else. That's the scientifically proven most effective path towards change. Now, the Israelites, as we saw when we begin the book of Exodus, they're in slavery. They are not doing well. Here's some of the kinds of slavery that Israel experienced. Number one, they were enslaved by violence and psychological control. The Pharaoh demonstrates both throughout this story. He has infants snatched away. We found that in our reading in Acts, which summarizes the story of Exodus. He suddenly changes people's work conditions, forcing them to work hard and produce the same results with less resources. He is unpredictable. He keeps you always reacting to him. This is one of the forms of slavery that they experienced. They're also enslaved by his unpredictability and his whims. The Pharaoh, see, was not guided by a higher law than himself. Nothing governed him that could be appealed to, and a law would have been a safeguard. They were enslaved by being turned into units of productivity rather than people. Their value was sucked out of them. They were seen as something that could get a result, but not as people, as valuables in and of themselves. They were enslaved by controlling their freedom of time and their placement and their association. They were forced to work long hours. They were told where to live in the land of Goshen. They were shunned by the Egyptians. They were enslaved by authority invading their home life. The authorities came in and took their babies and threw them into the river. There was genocide. But even today, inwardly, whether we know it or not, we experience certain kinds of slavery as well. We can be in slavery to our own habits, our own out of control desires that lead us to a result that we don't want. And yet time and time again, we find ourselves doing the thing that we said that we would never do. Social slavery, we know what is right and we know what we want and we know where we want to go, but we keep on being hemmed in by the preferences, the thoughts, the expressions of others. That can be its own form of slavery. Security, anxiety over money and accommodations can be used to control us. We can find ourselves having gotten to a long stretch of time, having never done what we set out to do because we were always reacting to, always responding to the need to try and be safe. We can find ourselves in slavery to tradition. Sometimes the thing that used to work gets in the way of what will work now. We can get trapped in our own ruts and biases. The inability to admit that we have done things that have led to a wrong result keeps us accomplishing the same result. We can be in slavery to our own feelings. There's multiple ways that we can feel about anything that occurs in life, but when we are in slavery to our response to something, ultimately we are controlled by whichever way our own psychology takes us, whichever way we feel in the moment, whether or not you had breakfast in the morning, if you are guided just purely by your feelings, whether you had enough sleep, can lead you to say, I feel this way, therefore I should do this thing. We can make major decisions because of how we feel moment to moment. It can be its own kind of slavery, and there's many other things like this. God wants to take us out of slavery. He wants to free us by bringing his own good and perfect law so we would not be controlled by these things, but so that we would be free to serve him. And now, just before we move on to the next section, does anyone have a question or a thought or a response or anything like that before we move on? Any questions? Okay, well, I didn't really prepare you guys ahead of time. Okay, Gary.
It's not so much a question, but it's coming to a place where we realize, like, as you said, one of the 12 steps is realizing that we can't do on our own. But one of the reasons, or one of the things that leads to success is community. And that is why certain programs lead more to success, because there's accountability and accountability, because you're in a community that people aren't judging. Support.
Yeah. So for anyone who might be here listening right now or later on the live stream, one of the things that Gary mentioned was support and accountability, as well as acknowledging your own inability. So it's interesting that one of the things that God commands us to do when we come to him is he says, no, don't just have your own relationship with you and get around other people. You're part of a community now. You're part of a body. We're all here. There's a commandment in Hebrews chapter 10, which says, don't neglect the coming together of the saints. Why? When we come together, we are encouraged. We're seen in a way that maybe we don't see ourselves. We see things in other people's lives that spur us on and encourage us. And all together, we're coming and saying, we don't have everything that we need just by ourselves. We need Jesus. He's the one who is faithful in our place. He's the one who takes the punishment that for sin that we could not endure. He's the one who leads us into freedom. And all together, we are gathering around and we are known as people who have stepped onto this walk in life, this path. Okay, anything else? Anyone else have yeah, Joan.
Picking up the scripture, know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except me.
I love that. So Joan said, know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And Jesus says he is the truth and the way and the life. The truth isn't some ambiguous thing that we come up with from inside of ourselves. Every problem that we've ever had in life, we're the common denominator. Right? But Jesus says he is the truth. Look towards him. Okay, one more, if anyone else has an observation or a thought or a question. Okay, we'll move on. So God takes us out of the slavery that we're in, out of the things that we're in bondage to, out of the things that we say, this is just our life. This is the way that we know things to be. And he says, this is not where what we're meant for. We're meant to be serving something higher than the things that drag us down, pull us down to earth. He comes, and in the story of the Exodus is God coming down and rescuing people so that we can enter into his new way of living. What the Israelites needed was not to make better of the situation. It wasn't to do a slightly better version of slavery. It wasn't to just minorly improve on what they had. No, it was they needed to be rescued. They needed to be freed. And God, in Exodus chapters 7 to 15, comes down and delivers Israel with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, 10 plagues that show his glory and his power and his might over all the gods of Egypt, all of the things that people served, over everything that people were chasing, over the very institutional authority of Egypt itself. God showed himself to be more worthy, more glorious, more mighty than anything else that people were chasing or following at the moment. God came down and he showed himself to be worthy of leading us into freedom. And then he gave them laws in Exodus chapter 20 to bring them into freedom. Once Israel was brought out of Egypt, they weren't yet ready to enter into the promised land. No, they needed to be guided. So Israel is newly freed, but they're structurally broken. And the law stabilizes like a cast for a broken arm that's being mended, stabilizes the people and brings them into a new way of living and thinking before it empowers them. And think about this, the law touches every area of life. Now, I'm not going to steal Jeremy's thunder for next week, and so I'm going to leave the 10 Commandments alone. But in general, there are areas of life that the commands of God touch, like time. And so the people are actually commanded to take rests. They're commanded to have festivals. Imagine God commands you to party a few times a year. And in fact, if you are Jewish and you work in a place of employment and you are given religious holidays off, you have more holidays off than anybody. True story, because God commands it. And so a few times a year, he likes rest. He likes enjoyment. He likes celebration. For the body, there's diet and purity, things that affect us, but through what we bring in, through our relationships. There's laws governing family and sexuality. Through economics, there's laws governing debt and how we approach debt and how we factor in debt. And also gleaning, how we leave something behind for others, even though we could get more profit by going back for a second round to gather things into the storehouse. There's laws governing justice. There's courts and laws governing witnesses and how many witnesses are needed for something to be established as fact, because people need equity. before the law. It can't just be that the most powerful or the most connected people would win over everyone else. God's law gives everyone an even starting point. This law includes laws about worship and sacrifice and holiness. This law touches every dimension of life. If you are an Old Testament Jew, the things that you eat, the places where you spend your time, what you wear for clothing, the way that you approach family, the holidays that you spend, their weekly rhythm, everything reminds you that you belong to God and He loves you. Imagine looking at every part of your life, and every part of it somehow comes down to reminding you that you are loved by God. That's what it's like to be an Old Testament Jew. Does He still want that? Even though the Old Testament laws, we don't follow all of those as Christians today. Does He still want for you to know that you are His precious possession, that He loves you, and that He desires your freedom? Yes. That is what the law is meant to lead us into and to show us. And the law, especially for the time, the Old Testament law, it was radically countercultural. It was progressive without being woke. It cared for things that others didn't care for. It asserted that the poor were just as worthy of dignity and value and worth as the rich. The weak were just as valuable as the powerful. It brought equality before the law, including laws governing the king, that he was not exempt. It brought limits on punishment, rules for warfare and treatment of foreigners, protection for the poor. Sexual ethics were tied to the covenant and God's design for family, not to power and who could get whatever they wanted. The law put due process and limits on revenge. It asserted care for the disabled and the marginalized. If you read through the Old Testament law the first time, you may be shocked by some of the things that are included. But if you were to go and read through and expect something that was regressive and harsh, you would be surprised. There's nothing like this in the ancient world. Look at how many people are cared for and valued and lifted up through this good and perfect law. Going on, weekly rest, the Sabbath was brought for all classes, not just the rich and the powerful, not just the elites who got to rest and have all the poor serve them, but everyone got rest. There's some environmentalism as well. Now, I know that there's different political views and whatnot in this room, and I'm not going to own everything that goes under the term environmentalism, but there's two specific things. There's rules for warfare. One says when you go out to a city to besiege it, don't cut down all the trees. And it kind of has this sort of peacenik thing at the end. It says, are the trees human that they should be besieged by you? Maybe I heard a couple of chuckles. There we go. Okay. And then also instead of just drying out the land and extracting everything out of it, you're supposed to give the land rest. So actually caring for the land, the promised land that God leads us into, is part of the value of His law. The Sabbath prevents burnout culture. The Jubilee year confronts generational inequality by canceling all debts. Sexual ethics confront our tendency to turn other people into objects for our own gratification. Truth-telling laws confront propaganda. Community responsibility confronts isolation. We are not meant to be left alone. We're meant to be brought together. And so with all of this, God's provision of a good and perfect law, that leads us into our second and last for today, but second question and answer and observation time. Does anyone have any thoughts on what I just said?
Is that where stewardship of the earth comes from? The foundations of that?
Stewardship of the earth. Yeah. So there's for those who are more conservative minded, you may know and appreciate the name Preston Manning. He's a founder of the Reform Party of Canada, which turned into part of the Conservative Party of Canada. And he is an active conservationist. He says that conservation, after all, is part of being conservative. They're part of the same root word. And so even getting beyond the politics of it, this comes from a biblical worldview. The earth is a gift from God. And so when someone gives you a gift, do you wreck it? Do you have no regard for it? Or are you careful with it? Do you preserve it? Do you make sure that it's that it's something that you receive with care. Knowing that the earth is God's good gift and everything in it leads us to take care of what we have. And so we'll go around and we'll pick up our garbage and we'll take care of the animals around us. If there's any that are dying out, zoos are good conservation tools, and they sometimes bring whole populations of animals back to life, and God's people are given care over God's creation, and we're able to make that part of our lives. Is there another thought or question or observation? Or objection? Get spicy. Bring it on. Okay, anything else? I like it. There we go. A+, good. Okay, and what I find is, if I were to pick a worldly stance on something, either left or right, I find that when I get tied into a particular camp, God's law confronts some elements of what that camp says. It does not recommend selfishness. It also does not recommend giving everything over to, well, how much trouble do I want to get in? It challenges us wherever we're at. And we can get more specific out in the hallway later. So first, we have slavery, the things that we are enslaved to. We have God's good and perfect law, which challenges us wherever we're at. And his law is better than any of man's law. His way is better than our way. And number 3, he brings us into his promised land. Now, there's 2 parts of this. A promised land represents an entirely new life lived according to God's way. It is not the way of Egypt. It is not our way lived out in isolation in the wilderness, apart from all structures and authorities. It is God's way, according to God's law, knowing that God is good. Remember, faith is trusting in God, and trusting God means when he says, do this, we say, I will do that even if I don't understand it, because I trust the one who gave the command. So trust leads us to believe when God says something is true. Trusting God leads us to obey when God says to do something. And they both are rooted in trust. And so this promised land that he leads us into, this is a new way of living. There's a presentation of the gospel that ends by saying the life that Jesus calls us into isn't just a life that starts in heaven after we die, but it is a life that starts now and lasts forever. It is a life that begins right here and now, and it keeps on going. But there's also something really interesting in how the book of Exodus is laid out. Well, it's right there in the name, the Exodus. We associate this book with God leading his people out of slavery and plagues and crossing the Red Sea and calling Moses and the burning bush. But that can't be all of what the book is about, because that all happens and is over less than halfway through the book. God's law leads us further into the promised land in a different way. It leads us to Jesus, and although it might be difficult to see Jesus sometimes in every passage, in every part of every book of the Bible, I find that if we back up and we look at the structure sometimes, the whole message together will show us where he is. Here's the message of the book of Exodus really quickly. In the first part, chapters 1 to 15, the parts that all the movies are about, that retell this story, we have the call of Moses and the 10 plagues and the people being released from this external enslaving force. And then they enter into the wilderness, they cross through the Red Sea, only for them to find out that they're not quite free yet. See, they thought that all of their problems came from something out there. But now, freed from Egypt and all of its oppressive authority, things go badly right away. They begin grumbling and complaining and turning away from the one who rescued them, and they enter into judgment in Exodus chapters 15 to 18. And then in chapter 19 to 24, God extends them grace, not because of anything that they have done, not because they deserve it. They've just rebelled after all, but he gives them the covenant of his law, invites them into a new way of living. And then we see in chapters 25 to 31, God giving instructions for a tabernacle. What's a tabernacle? It's a place of worship where God's presence descends upon it, and God is present in the midst of his people. What's the pattern here? Rebellion is met with God's grace. What's the ultimate expression of God's grace? God's presence. But it doesn't end there. It goes on again in another cycle in chapters 32 to 40. Again, there's rebellion as the people sit down to worship a set of golden calves, and grace as God again invites them into his covenant, and presence as again details of the building of the tabernacle are given, because the ultimate expression of his grace is his presence. And yet what the people are in slavery to, the structure of Exodus will show us, is not something external, it's something internal. There's something inside that needs to be fixed. And the only answer is God's grace that leads to his presence. And yet, how will we fix once and for all what's inside of us? The very next book of the Bible gives the answer. The book of Leviticus leads us from the outsides of the book into the insides. And I mislabeled the bottom one. It should be A2. But on the outsides, we're led through rituals, offerings, and feasts, and observances, and dedications. The slightly inner part of the book, where we take a look at priesthood, the laws about the first priests and their holiness. And then as we get a little bit closer to the center of the book, we look at laws about purity, ritual purity, and moral purity. But the very center of the book, the very center that answers the question of how can we be brought into God's presence? How can we resolve this repeating cycle of what we are enslaved to inwardly, is this chapter about a celebration called the Day of Atonement. And in the Day of Atonement, and two offerings are made. One is brought in, and the priest lays his hand on the animal and confesses all the sins of the people, everything that he could possibly think of. You know, imagine he's talking, oh God, some of us are this, and some of us are that, and some of us are guilty of that, and some of us have done this, until everyone has been named, and everyone's been offended, and everyone's had their thing addressed. And then they take that animal and they set it free, and they release it out of the camp, and it carries all the sin away. The other animal is offered up as a sacrifice for sin. All of the guilt is placed on it, and it takes the punishment, and the people are set free. What is our only way out of this cycle of rebellion and grace and presence, and then rebellion again? It is that Jesus is our true and better Passover lamb. It is that he is our Day of Atonement offering. He is the one who takes the sin out of the camp. He is the one who does what we cannot do ourselves. Our problem is not external, it's internal. But thanks be to God, he has a plan for that. He has provided Jesus as the answer so that he can bring us into his presence, and he can dwell among us. And Jesus is the presence of God in the midst of his people. Amen? And so, just to end, we have been set free to live free. We have been brought out of slavery into a deliverance that is led by God giving us his true and better way. And when we find ourselves unable to keep that, he provides the answer. He shows us the way that he guides us into, and he also provides the offering, the true moral law keeper, the fulfillment of all the law, Jesus, in our place, so that we can walk in freedom. That is God's goal for the law. Not servitude, but freedom. He wants our freedom. He wants to set us free. He wants us to dwell in a good and perfect life built around him. He is for us, not against us. He pursues us when we walk away from him. He is the one who sends his son to offer himself in our place, which we are about to celebrate through the taking of communion. Let me pray. God, thank you that we have been set free. We can live free because you have given us all the goodness and holiness of your law, of your way of living. And yet also you have provided for us, knowing that we are unable to keep it ourselves. We have taken the step of admitting that we are unable to do things on our own. We submit ourselves to you as the higher power. We submit our lives to you to know your will. God, would you help us to do what we are unable to do by our own strength? Would you call us together into community so that we might serve and love and live for you together? I pray this in Jesus' name, and all God's people said, amen. All right, well, we are going to go into our time of communion right now.